Welcome to the Gen X Multiplex, a 35-year podcast flashback where two former high school movie theater ushers and current-day 50-something film nerds take on the task of watching or rewatching the movies of their youth, the ones that came out 35 years ago this month in 1989. On our first ever Prequel series episode, we'll travel to the cornfields of Iowa to hit some flyers with Kevin Costner and Ray Liotta in Field of Dreams. Then we'll make a stop off in Jasper, Missouri to bust some heads and drop some Eastern philosophy with Patrick Swayze and Kelly Lynch in the original Roadhouse. After that, we'll go skip tracing across the American Southwest with Clint Eastwood and Bernadette Peters in their PINK CADILLAC. Finally, we'll head back east to New York City to go on the lam with Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder in the blind, deaf, and dumb buddy comedy, See No Evil, Hear No Evil. Thanks to past pandemics, recent strikes, and Hollywood's highly uncertain financial future, there's not too many worthwhile new summer movies in theaters to see. So join us, Matt B. and Brian P., for some old ones in our virtual multiplex, if you please. That's right, folks, you heard it correctly. Believe it or not, we are back. After 2.5 years, I think it's closer to like 2 years and 5 months if you want to be a stickler, since the multiplex doors have been closed. But we are back for our 1989 prequel series. Brian, hello, how you doing out there? Did I get the math right on that? Is it 2 years and 5 months by your calculations?
Hello, Matt. Yes, I think you have it correct. And I'm surprised that the multiplex is still standing, like all the other movie theaters seem to be still in business. But yeah, happy to be back and looking forward to watching some movies again.
And it was December 2021. Our last episode dropped right the day before New Year's, December 31st, 2021. We talked about maybe there'll be a prequel series. We don't really know. Well, I guess we kind of predicted the future, but way far into the future. And we are back for a 1989 prequel series. 2.5 years later, we started out in the spring of 90, and that was we started sort of smack dab in the middle of when we started working at this movie theater in Virginia, the RC 10 of Fredericksburg, which later became the Regal 10 of Fredericksburg. And so we never had done our initial first summer of working at the theater where we first met. So it was kind of a nagging itch that we always thought we'd like to maybe come back and revisit that portion of our growing up at the movie theater. But yes, unfortunately, like you heard in the intro, we must admit, gulp, we are now 2.5 years later in our early 50s. How do you feel about that, Brian?
As positive as I can be. I don't mind the growing old gracefully. You just have to stop reminding me.
I will do that because I feel the same as you. The less reminded I am, the happier I am. Note, folks, we're in our very early 50s. It's still very early. I mean, we just barely turned 50. So what's happened in the last 2.5 years, or almost 2.5 years? Well, for me, you might remember way back at the end of that 2021 December episode, I had officially moved back to Brooklyn from Austin, even though we talked about COVID a lot on our initial run of podcasts because it was a pandemic era podcast. After all that talk, I finally officially got COVID for the first time pretty shortly after moving back to New York. Not right away. I was still masking up, I think, for almost, I'd say, 3/4 of 2022. But somewhere in the fall of 2022, it finally hit me. So I had my little run-in with the big C. Things have changed a lot since then. It's kind of receded into the background. People are still getting it. It's almost sort of more like the common cold, though. I finally finished that epic Western screenplay, which I talked about on occasion on the podcast. I mean, you could argue that the podcast was kind of a very long procrastination method to keep me from finishing the screenplay, but it is finally done. Brian, can you attest to that? Brian has read it?
I have read it. It is true. He's not lying.
It's true. Whether or not it'll ever hit the screen, that's a whole other ball of wax. We won't get into that. What else? Well, some sad news, I guess. Maybe funny for certain people. I don't know. But I also recently lost my long-term editing job that I had back then. How did I lose it? What did I lose it to? Take a wild guess. Artificial intelligence. I am one of the unlucky. Well, sort of. That's also maybe a little bit of a white lie. I sort of lost it to AI. Let's just say AI kind of like insinuated itself into the job that I had had for 4+ years and made it even shittier than it was before and made the company I worked for kind of untenable. So, but I like to just say the ease of saying, AI took my job. But anyway, long story short, because of those reasons, I have now got some extra time on my hands to podcast, so I'm taking advantage of it with this 1989 prequel series. Brian, what's going on with you? I heard on the street that you've got a new favorite director and maybe some kind of like shady side hustle called Absurd Jelly Beans. Tell me what's going on with that.
Yes, I have a new favorite director, Matt. Thank you. And I have to thank you for recommending him to me. One day out of the blue, you just texted me saying, hey, here's a movie that you should watch. It's actually a good superhero movie. It was called Smoking Causes Coughing. And I was bored one night, and I'm like, why not? It's like a 70-some-odd minute movie. I'll give it a whirl. It was very good, by the way. I highly recommend it. And it's a comedy. It's by a French director named Quentin Dupieux. And so I was like, well, that was a good movie, so let me look up and see the rest of his stuff. And lo and behold, I like practically everything he's done, and I pretty much ran through his entire filmography. And I highly recommend any of his movies. Some are better than others, but they're only like, a little over an hour long each. So for every gem you get, you might have to sit through a couple that are just okay. So that did take up quite a bit of time. And as far as the side hustle you were talking about, yes, I think you were wandering around the Twitter feeds and came across Absurd Jelly Beans, which is something that I have been doing on the side. Well, when the podcast ended, after our original run, I had a lack of creative outlets for myself, and so me being bored one day, I just thought of some interesting things to doodle and came up with this idea of Absurd Jelly Beans. It kind of evolved into some NFTs after doing some research about cryptocurrency and blockchain nonsense, and then from NFTs it ended up being on t-shirts and all this other nonsense. Feel free to look it up if you want, but now that the podcast is back, I guess I now have a new creative outlet. A new old creative outlet.
That's true, and you also have a summer break coming up from your teaching job. As a teacher, you do get the summers off, which is, I believe, why you have the job of teacher.
That is true. I get 2 months off.
And you also have more time for this Absurd Jelly Beans venture, which I'm still kind of confused as to what exactly it sells. I know when I first saw it, I was like, is Brian slinging crypto and NFTs now? But it also seems like there's T-shirts, some mugs. I don't know. Is he gonna start selling some kind of like novelty chocolates, or I don't know. It seemed like a catch-all to me, and I was a little worried about your sanity. But I am happy to see that you've fully adopted Quentin D, not Quentin T. We won't talk about Quentin T because he's probably still figuring out his 10th feature film by Quentin Tarantino for the next couple of years. But meanwhile, Quentin D knocking out like 2 or 3 every year, 80 minutes tops. Keep going, Quentin D. What else happened while we were gone? We'll hit some of the major news items in the movies since the end of 2021. Well, old Tommy Cruise. We used to talk about him and kind of look forward to Top Gun Maverick, but it kept getting pushed back during our initial run. Never came out. Well, it finally came out in the summer of 2022, and old Tommy Cruise, I guess, saved Hollywood theatrical exhibition with Top Gun Maverick. Got people back into theaters. Chris Rock got bitch slapped by Will Smith at the Oscars. Don't have a lot to say about that, as already was poured over enough, but I guess it made the Oscars interesting one year, right, Brian?
Yeah, and then Will Smith goes and wins the Oscar afterwards. That was an odd one. That was weird.
What else? Well, of course, last summer, 2023, we had the Barbenheimer phenomenon. I actually went down to Fredericksburg and caught Oppenheimer with Brian in old Fredericksburg Limax. What else? We had a little bit of a superhero Marvel fatigue kind of has creeped in the last year. Box office numbers are down. People still going. They're not as fatigued as I was with it like 10 years ago, but whatever. There was, of course, the actors and writers strikes, which made the schedule of things coming out almost as crazy and jumbled as during the COVID period when things were getting canceled and pushed back and all that kind of stuff. We mentioned the rise of AI. It's not just coming for your jobs, but it's coming for your movies too, and that has already started happening. All the streamers have kind of adopted ad-supporting platforms, which they push even harder than their regular non-ad plans. Lots of unnecessary remakes, sequels, sidequels, prequel series. You had a John Wick spinoff called The Continental. You had a Sexy Beast prequel where we got to find out what Don Logan was, what his trauma was that made him such an a-hole in the movie. I guess that's kind of important, maybe not. You had the Ted prequel series set in the 90s. So there's been a lot of prequel TV series spun off from movies. Did you catch any of those? Or are you already bored with prequel series?
I am. I mean, I did watch The Continental because I like John Wick so much. Definitely was not necessary, but I don't know. I get the idea. They're kind of like remind you of what you liked about the original movies without being as good as the original movies.
So you're probably asking yourself, now that I brought that up, why did we decide to reopen the Multiplex for our own, arguably entirely unnecessary 1989 prequel series? Well, because damn it, the old RC/Regal is somehow still open for business, despite the fact that I made a losing bet with Brian that it would be closed by the end of last year. He won a whole $5. I think was it $5 or 10?
It was $5.
Because it sounded like a lot of the Regals were in trouble. So I'm like, Brian, I bet our old theater is going to be closed by the end of 23. But nope, it's still going strong. And so therefore, I guess we have to be. Also, longtime listeners might remember, I have this kind of like the nagging completionist tendency to like when I start something, I got to finish it all the way out. And like we said, we had never done that first summer of 1989 movies working at the theater. So it's always been nagging me. Somewhere at the beginning of this year, I started listening to the old podcasts, and I'm like, now might be a good time. I think maybe the time is right. Brian had been talking somewhat nostalgically about enjoying having an organized schedule of like older things to watch. Am I way off on that, Brian, or no?
Well, you're not wrong, but I believe it was mentioned one time to you that, hey, you know what? I kind of miss having kind of a regimented list of movies we were going to watch for the podcast. And I think you took that one statement and ran with it. And suddenly I'm nostalgic for the old days. No, I'm just joking. No, I do like the idea of going back and watching these movies because I always say I'd love to watch some of these, but I never find time to do it. And this kind of motivates me, gives me a reason to go back and watch some of the movies. Granted, not all of them are golden, but that's kind of the part of the fun of this.
Besides, isn't everyone just waiting with bated breath to find out how Matt B., Brian P., and let's not forget our old buddy, even though he's not here on this episode, Jeff M., how we first met? Okay, well, maybe don't answer that question, but anyway, I'm going to answer it. So how did we first meet at the Virginians before going on to the new RC 10plex the following month at the end of June? That is when the much storied theater that we worked at in the original podcast opened at the very end of June. I think it was June 30th, right? Did we establish that?
Yes. June 30th is when the official RC Movies 10 of Fredericksburg opened up, just before the July 4th holiday of that summer.
Right. So in May of 1989, we first started at a little fourplex theater called the Virginians, and that's where we first met. I was working inside at this snack bar and then also the door a little bit. Brian started in the drive-in, which he'll tell you about in a little bit. I believe I had a kind of brief restaurant job, like a busboy or something, for not long before I started working there. So this wasn't my first job, but I can sort of consider it my first real job. Because the other one, I think it was short-lived, and I think I was still getting dropped off to go to work. This was the first job where I actually had a driver's license, or had just gotten a driver's license. Was a movie nerd even back then, so was kind of excited, like, hey, I get to work at a movie theater and see free movies. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Virginians?
Well, the Virginians was actually a really old building. It wasn't very fancy, but it was pretty old. And I remember working there with somebody who told me kind of the history of the place, where there was kind of like this side entrance that you could go into, and it went straight upstairs to the projection booth. And next to that, there was kind of like this kind of bricked up window. And someone explained to me that that was actually where the blacks had to enter the Virginians back when it was a segregated movie theater. Black people would go on that side. Next to that was kind of the main box office that went into the main floor with the big concessions in the lobbies. And that was where, obviously the whites would enter in that way. And at some point, they then converted that over where they made the upstairs more into a projection booth. They got rid of the balcony altogether. And instead of having the one or two screens that used to be there, they made it kind of they got 4 screens in there. And then they converted the one box office into like a storage room where we kept like candy and boxes and all that stuff in there. So it had kind of this checkered history, which just shows you how old it was and where we were located, right? This is Fredericksburg. It's called the Virginians. It was nice that it had a drive-in behind the Virginians, and that's where I actually started working. I did have a job also before this one. I worked at like a department store. It was kind of like a Target. It was called Ames. And it was actually up in Stafford, like near where I lived. It was a crappy job, just working the register and all that stuff. But unlike Matt, I was not like a movie nerd. I was actually deprived of movies for most of my childhood. I mean, we didn't own a VCR, didn't have HBO, and my parents rarely went to the movies unless I kind of really begged them to. So when the ad came up for a movie theater job, I got kind of excited. I could be around movies, I guess, because I kind of really liked them. I just never got to see them. And so I had to drive 25 miles down there to get the job. So I had a long commute back then when I got the job. It was Memorial Day weekend, 35 years ago. So that's when I actually started at the drive-in. Did not move up into the main building for a couple weeks.
We were trying to determine, did we start working on May 20th or May 27th? We never were able to nail down the exact day. I might have started before you. You might have started on the 27th. We're just going to say it was Memorial Day for the sake of ease. And we kind of vaguely remember meeting each other sometime around Memorial Day. And we were both hired with the idea that it was kind of like prep for they knew at that point that they were going to open the 10-plex sometime in June. So it's almost kind of like they were loading up extra personnel for this big, exciting 10-theater multiplex that was coming into town. At least that's what they told me. Did they tell you the same thing?
They did not tell me that.
But I do remember I think there was a little bit of a grass is always greener with our two job details, because I remember I was a little jealous of Brian after I met him, that he got to work the drive-in. He would just like kind of come in later hours, and I'd always liked I hadn't gone to the drive-in a lot growing up. I vaguely remember like a very fun Grease Saturday Night Fever double feature when I was like 6 or 7 or something like that. But it seemed more interesting to me working out there, and I think Brian was already kind of a little over it and wanted to work inside. Is that true, or am I putting words in your mouth?
Oh, definitely. I did not like working at the drive-in. I mean, I thought it was kind of cool. Like I'd go outside and see the big, huge screen and all that stuff. But that building felt even older than the Virginians building. It was like old and concrete and dusty, and when they were making fries and hot dogs and all that in there, that's not really what I wanted to do when I got the job. I was picturing a movie theater. I asked the first chance I got to get out of working at the drive-in. It took me a couple weeks, and then a couple weeks I ended up getting permanently put into the main building. But looking back, I think it's awesome I worked at the drive-in, because it's something I could say I did, because now they're all gone. It's a forgotten venue.
And when we were looking through some of the old ads, we noticed also they had some weird-ass double features. Take a listen to some of these. Right around the time we were starting, maybe even the first weekend Brian was there, they were running a triple feature of The Naked Gun, followed by The Accused, which, if you know anything about that movie, an odd thing to pair with Naked Gun, first off, and then putting that second. And then the third movie was Friday the 13th Part 7. So you're just getting yanked all around the movie genres by that triple feature, from broad slapstick comedy to very serious like rape drama to a 7th entry in a slasher series. So I don't know who was programming that stuff back then. And then the following weekend, it was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, followed by Mississippi Burning.
They like that comedy than like serious drama right afterwards.
Yeah, it's like Bill and Ted, and then we're going to get into some really heavy Southern racial politics right after. So I don't know who was responsible for those, but it was someone was either having a lot of fun with it or just didn't know what the hell they were doing. But we're here to talk about what were the 4 movies that were playing when we first started on either the 20th of May or the 27th of May, somewhere in there. Definitely by the 27th of May. But first, before things get too out of hand with our 1989 reviews, we have some Gen X Multiplex, the prequel House Rules to throw down. Kind of like Dalton and Roadhouse, which is one of the movies we'll be talking about. He had his 3 rules. We have 5 rules for our new prequel series, and we came up with these rules so, like I said, things don't get too out of hand. We kind of rein ourselves in. The episodes don't run for way too long. Rule number 1 for the prequel series: only 5 more episodes. We're going to do 1 per month from Memorial Day to Labor Day, or just around Labor Day, basically May to September. So this will finally finish out our early Virginian/RC years and get us up to a final 35 episodes total. What's rule number 2, Brian?
Rule number 2, there will be only 4 1989 movies per podcast, and they must have been played at either the Virginians or at the RC Movies Tent of Fredericksburg. We might have a special September episode, which might have some exception to that. Otherwise, they had to have been played at the Virginians or RC Movies Tent. This will mean we'll skip over at least 2 major 1989 summer blockbusters that played over at the mall, which was the other movie theater we had in town. But you know what? If you're really looking to hear about Indiana Jones or Batman, you can go find another podcast. There's plenty of them out there.
The internet is littered with Batman-related podcasts, trust me,
Right, yeah.
of varying degrees of quality, and some Indiana Jones ones too. Rule number 3, we will only cover 1 or 2 tops 2024 new releases per episode. Theatrical or streaming. We'll do them at the end of each podcast just to kind of keep things somewhat current. These movies that we select will be movies with preferable ties to the 80s or 80s franchises, or they will be prequels themselves, maybe sequels. So we're going to try to keep them at least somewhat related to our 1989 prequel podcast. What's number 4?
Rule number 4, no movie theater news. Right? There was always a lot of changing going on with all the COVID stuff. But that's not happening so much anymore, so there's no reason to go over any news. If anything big happens, we'll be sure to let you know. And also no quarantine queue. Again, no COVID, no queue. That's it.
Right, and our final rule, number 5, we are going to introduce brand new grease-stained bow tie ratings for all of our movies. Our bow ties were pretty greasy by the end of the night working at this popcorn, fake butter-infested snack bar. So we're introducing this rating system because one of the kind of complaints we would get in the initial run of the podcast, or suggestions, complaints, were kind of like, okay, you guys talked for like 10 or 15 minutes about this movie, but I kind of don't really know what you thought of it. Some people like a numeric scale. I know Brian, Mr. Numbers, likes his numbers too. I've always kind of veered away from a rating scale because, you know, you'll say like, hey, it's 2.5 one week, and the next week you'll be like, nah, it's 3. Kind of resistant, but it kind of makes sense because then you can put a capper on it. And if we turn it into grease-stained bow ties, I guess that makes sense. If we get a big fat goose egg, a 0, we'll come up with a special rating. And also maybe similarly, if we have something that goes even above 4 grease-stained bow ties, we might have a rating for that. There's our hard and fast rules for the prequel series. Now that we've set everything up, you kind of remember who we are, you kind of know what we're up to, you kind of know the rules of the house. Let's get to our first 1989 feature, Field of Dreams.
Who the hell are you?
Sir, my name's Ray Kinsella.
We got a learning disability here?
Mr. Man, if I could just have 1 minute, please.
Look, I can't tell you the secret of life, and I don't have any answers for you. I don't give interviews, and I'm no longer a public figure. I just want to be left alone. So piss off.
Wait! Look, I've come 1,500 miles to see you at the risk of losing my home and alienating my wife. All I'm asking is 1 minute. Please.
1 minute.
Okay, I understand your desire for privacy, and I wouldn't dream of intruding if this weren't extremely important.
Oh, God. I don't do causes anymore.
This isn't a cause. I don't need money or an endorsement.
Refreshing.
You once wrote, there comes a time when all the cosmic tumblers have clicked into place and the universe opens itself up for a few seconds to show you what's possible.
Oh, my God.
What?
You're from the 60s.
Well, yeah, actually.
Ow, hey. Back to the 60s.
Wait a
back.
second.
There's no place for you here in the future. Get back while you still can.
You've changed. You know that?
Yes, I suppose I have. How about this? Peace, love, dope. Now get the hell out of here.
That was a clip from Field of Dreams. In case you don't remember what Field of Dreams was about, I'm going to actually reach back to an old segment we used to do called What Ed Said to help us out, to remind you all what Field of Dreams is about. Well, first to remind you about what Ed said. It's a segment we did back when we first started the podcast of a local reviewer named Ed Jones, who used to write for the local newspaper, the Freelance Star. Ed gave it 2 stars. He said, The Field of Dreams is an overly sentimental, fuzzy fantasy that doesn't offer enough reason to care. An Iowa farmer, played by Kevin Costner, carves out a corner of his cornfield as an eternal field of play for Shoeless Joe Jackson and other immortals. Magical but shallow. That's a bit of a very vague way to describe it, but if you don't remember what Field of Dreams was about, basically Kevin Costner is a farmer who hears voices right off the top of the movie. It says the famous line, if you build it, he will come. And turns out he needs to build a baseball field in the middle of his cornfield. So he mows down half of his cornfield, puts up the field, and as Ed Jones says, immortals show up. Mainly it's just old baseball players that show up to play baseball there. And from there, kind of like the magic and the mystery that comes into why this happened to him. And that starts his journey to find out, why he was supposed to do this and why the old White Sox appear in his field.
Yeah, that's right. And recently it's kind of come back sort of slightly into the cultural conversation because John Mulaney at the most recent Oscars kind of had like a sort of like long monologue / joke that he inserted into one of the presentations about a certain famous scene in Field of Dreams. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Brian. What were your 1989 remembrances of seeing this movie at the theater, or maybe not?
That's just it. My 89 remembrances are nothing because I did not see it back in 1989. I remember the movie poster was very famous. It was everywhere. It was plastered everywhere. I believe you even had the movie poster hanging on your wall. That's all I remember from it. I remember the quote, if you build it, he will come. And you get to find out who he is during the movie. You think it's one person, but then they change it at the end. So I finally did see it. Sometime in the 90s, I did watch it, and I wasn't very impressed. It was Kevin Costner, and I wasn't a huge Kevin Costner fan. And so I watched the movie. I didn't think much of it. And then when I told my wife, Courtney, I was like, you know what? I watched Field of Dreams, and I didn't really like it that much. She was shocked and horrified because I'm a monster, that I don't cry during Field of Dreams. How about you, Matt?
Well, I believe, Brian, although you didn't see it at all back then, I think this was actually, Field of Dreams was actually my first free movie as an employee at the Virginians. I think this is the first one that I took advantage of. Hey, I work in a movie theater now. I can see free movies. And went and saw this one night after work. I, unlike Brian, was kind of a Kevin Costner fan back then. I know I really liked him in The Untouchables, or at least I really liked The Untouchables, and he was the main guy in it, so I had to like him. Bull Durham, another baseball movie, which, not to spoil anything, but I probably like a little better than Field of Dreams. So I was down with the Seaman, with the Costner, and as Brian rudely reminded me, I did have the poster, one of the many that I snagged from our 10plex days later on. I think I liked it quite a bit. I also not only had the poster, but I believe I had the store-bought VHS. Brian, now you've already told us a little bit about watching it in '89, and then later, or not watching it in '89, and then later picking up somewhere in the '90s or so, or 2000s watching it. What did you think watching it this time in 2024 for the podcast?
Actually, I think I feel wrongly accused. When I'm told that I don't cry during Field of Dreams, I have an issue with the movie in the fact that I think it's sold as kind of this dad movie, like a guy and his dad. And I kind of see how it's going there. The whole, if you build it, he will come. Who shows up when he builds the Field of Dreams? A wonderful Ray Liotta as Shoeless Joe Jackson shows up. And so you think, I guess, at first that's who was supposed to appear, and there's kind of a mystery as to why he appeared. And so it leads Kevin Costner down this path where he goes and he meets up with James Earl Jones' character, this writer named Terrence Mann. And he kind of goes on this journey to figure out why. And it turns out at the end, I guess, the he actually, in the If You Build It, He Will Come, is his father. But I don't think that this movie necessarily earns that emotional impact at the end that everyone claims so much. Because the movie itself, to me, is more of a movie about a guy kind of like he talks about his dad almost in a, not necessarily in a fond way. He says that he's kind of a guy that was almost too old when he had him, and so he didn't get to play catch when he was younger, and the dad kind of never did anything with his life and kind of sees him as almost a failure. I don't think he says that outright, but almost like this guy who's just there. And I get that he maybe misses his relationship with his dad, or a typical relationship with his dad. He doesn't know why he's on this journey. He goes through this whole process, convinces his wife, a very, very annoying Amy Madigan, to cut down half their cornfield, put up the baseball field. Shoeless Joe Jackson appears, and there's this kind of this magic and this mystery going on with the baseball players showing up. And I'm still confused, and I've seen it twice actually recently, once for the podcast and once when Courtney had me actually watch it. We watched it as a family about a year ago. But both times I got a little bit confused as to the reason why he goes from building the field and seeing, Shoeless Joe, and even Shoeless Joe brings out a couple other players. Suddenly he makes a connection with his dad. I think he goes to a school board meeting, and there's some kind of like twisting of the plot to get him to kind of make this connection to this writer who once wrote about his dad. And so the dad comes up again briefly, but he's like, oh, that has to be a coincidence because he mentioned my dad. So he goes on this journey to visit James Earl Jones, and then they go to a baseball game, and they see something on the billboard. There's all these kind of like plot mechanics that kind of like drive him from one point to the next. But this entire time, Kevin Costner is more being led down this path. And it's not like the movie is telling him, if you do all this stuff, hey, you might be reunited with your father. He's just going along this kind of mysterious path, which I guess is a nice thing to think about, this kind of like journey this guy's on. But it feels more like he's going through the midlife crisis where he doesn't want to end up like his dad. To me, all those plot mechanics to get him from one place to the next, what are they doing now? And then all of a sudden, at one point, he's time traveling back to like 1972 to meet an old baseball player. And then that baseball player, they end up picking up later as a young boy because he never fulfilled his dream of playing in the major leagues. So there's all these kind of like baseball references I didn't really get. And finally, you get to the end, back to the field. And then there's some oddness with like rules about who could come on and off the field and everything. And then finally, once you get all that settled, even with Timothy Busfield finally being able to see the players on the field, and them having a solution to their financial woes because now all these people are going to show up and watch these magical baseball players. After all of that stuff, then they tack on the end, oh, by the way, his father shows up. It's a nice moment, but I just didn't feel like it earned that because I don't think that Kevin Costner was looking for his father throughout the movie. I feel a little cheated when I watched the movie. Like, yeah, it's a nice ending, but I kind of didn't like the way it got to there. I liked all the stuff that happened on the field at the beginning when he builds the field and all that stuff and the magic and the mystery and the baseball players. And even at the end when he comes around, and I even like the ending with the father. I just wish there was more of a connection between the beginning and the ending that wasn't him just going on this weird wild goose chase road trip with time travel and that kind of nonsense. I wish it did a little bit more, maybe talking more about his father and missing his father and making more of the connection. So, but that's what I thought of it this time around.
So Brian already feels the hot breath of the audience breathing down his neck with some anger, or maybe just Courtney P, when she hears this, is going to give him a little bit, call him a soulless robot who has no tears in his body.
Yeah, apparently wouldn't be the first time.
What did I think rewatching it this time? Well, I must admit, although I think I liked it quite a bit more than Brian, I have to admit this movie is literal corn pone. It's about heaven made manifest as a baseball diamond in a cornfield. But I think it's kind of generally the good, harmless, Frank Capra-esque kind of corn pone. Kind of like, watching It's a Wonderful Life on Christmas, but with this one, you watch it in April on the first day of baseball season. I get it. I get why it had some cultural resonance. I do think it's kind of the ultimate dad movie. I didn't mind the plot mechanics so much, I think, because as soon as a voice is talking to him in a cornfield at the very beginning of the movie, I'm like, this is starting off on a somewhat absurd or nonsensical note. So I'm okay if how we get from point A to point B after that is sort of like a little bit random or feels a little bit random. You kind of have to take it on faith. I mean, at first it's like, yeah, maybe he is having a midlife crisis, but wait, other people in his family, like Amy Madigan, when the baseball diamond gets built, they're seeing it too. So I quickly put away the whole, okay, it's his personal midlife crisis. It's something else. It's operating on a different kind of dream logic or faith logic. And I think that's where some of my misgivings start to come in. I think I bought in a lot more in 89. This time I tended to distrust its sort of mixed messages. Definitely during the first, like, say, half hour or 45 minutes of the movie. This is definitely feeling like sort of a boomer generation sort of metaphor / parable / confession about kind of giving up on their 60s political ideals in favor of sort of like blind faith or maybe even their parents' old-timey religion. There was a lot of themes like that running underneath it, especially when you bring in James Earl Jones, who's like a lapsed radical who's kind of turned his back on like the Make Love Not War and the books that he bought. Meanwhile, like Costner and his family, they're like, you can see all this if you just believe in it. And the character Timothy Busfield, like Brian mentioned, the main one who cannot see it for a large portion of the movie is the guy who's obsessed with money. He's constantly badgering Costner and his family because they're about on the verge of bankruptcy. They were both ex-hippies who had like decided somewhat on a whim, let's try farming. And so they were never doing that great to begin with. But of course, when you cut down half your cornfield and put up a baseball field, you're going to be really doing poorly, practically speaking. So Busfield, as the guy who wants to basically buy the land, he can't see it for a large portion of it. But eventually, by the end of it, most everyone can see it in the cast, including Busfield, after a very hilarious random incident with Kevin Costner's daughter, played by Gabby Hoffman, falling off the bleachers kind of in a slapstick fashion with a hot dog lodged in her esophagus. So by the end, they've kind of come around to like, all right, yeah, this is this great magical thing that happened. I've reconnected with my dad. But also, they're going to start charging people $20 per head to watch an invisible baseball game. So they've kind of almost turned their back on this is just like a free inspirational thing that happened and have kind of, I guess, become sort of like good capitalists. They're charging $20 a head, and we see all these cars on the horizon that are lining up to come to this invisible, baseball game. That's steeper than, New York City movie prices, $20 a head. So for me, like the movie is, I'm kind of like, I'm getting mixed messages here. Is it this just like warm glow of have blind faith in your dreams and they'll come true? Or is it like, yeah, you can kind of do that up until a point until reality like barges its way in and then you got to start charging people. So it kind of sort of almost gives up on its ideals, like the characters maybe did. Sort of by the end, it felt like, like a lot of the hippie boomers did. They sold the fuck out. So that kind of didn't sit that well with me this time. It made it feel a little more false, or just like it brought up some things that it kind of didn't really want to deal with. And I'm sure the writer of the original book and the director, they were from that era, so they were probably grappling with it themselves, and they just didn't really have clean answers, in their own lives. It sounds like Brian didn't like the muddled plot. I didn't like the muddled message. But what I could relate to with Costner was kind of his urge to embark on a fool's errand and put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into an enterprise that will see him, if not zero financial gain, then very little. Because that is basically the MO of this prequel podcast. You could say if you record it, he will come. But the question is, who is the he in that scenario? I don't think Shoeless Joe Jackson is going to be showing up anytime soon in either one of our backyards, so we can only assume it's maybe Jeff M.
Who else could it be?
But I did not for a second buy Kevin Costner as an ex-hippie, ex-radical. Just because it's Kevin Costner, and especially like sort of what he later became. But also, he even says in the movie, the dude went to Berkeley and never dropped acid once in the 60s. He even makes a point of saying that. Like to his wife, because apparently she did, and honestly, Amy Madigan acts like she definitely had some dalliances with hallucinogens. So that part, I don't know, that might have flown right past me when I originally saw it, but this time I'm just like, ooh, why is Costner in this? How am I supposed to buy any of this backstory? But okay, whatever. Another odd casting choice, although I think he's great, and rest in peace, Ray Liotta, I always thought then and now was an odd choice for Shoeless Joe. He was just coming off Something Wild, playing a very unhinged, murderous fellow, and then kind of going right into Goodfellas, shooting like probably the same year as this was wrapping up on Goodfellas. And there's even a little part. He's generally, a pretty warm character who's, he's a ghost, but so he's idealized and he's sort of just nostalgia incarnate. But a little bit of the Goodfellas future Henry Hill comes out when he starts like negging on Ty Cobb.
Ty Cobb wanted to play. None of us could stand a son of a bitch when we were alive, so we told him to stick it.
Last but not least, a little tidbit when I was cruising the old internet for some trivia about Field of Dreams. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, a very young Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are somewhere in the Fenway crowd scene in the middle of the movie. So I gotta ask, is this where they first hatched their crackpot idea for Project Greenlight? Or maybe just Goodwill Bunting? This is why you tuned in again, folks, for a Prequel podcast, because you get comedy gold, but I digress. Before I digress too much, Brian, I think we got some grease-stained bow tie ratings to record, right?
Yes, we do. We can't forget those.
So give me yours.
For my first ever grease-stained bow tie rating, I give Field of Dreams only 1.5 grease-stained bow tie.
Talk about a wah-wah. Well, we know it's definitely not tear-stained from your review.
No, not at all.
Not a nary a tear shed from artificial intelligence Brian P. over there. Heartless bastard that he is. What about me? Well, I probably came down a little bit from 89. I would say my 89, if I was doing bow tie ratings back then, probably would have been a 3.5 or maybe 4. But my 2024 rating, I'm gonna go with 3 grease-stained bow ties for Field of Dreams.
Recommended then.
That is a recommend. On our scale, folks, a 3, I would call that a good, like a solid good. Not a great, but a good. That wraps up our first feature of episode 31 of the Gen X Multiplex, the prequel. Now let's move on to our second feature of the night. We're going to the Roadhouse. It's gonna be a real good time or bad? Let's find out.
People who really want to have a good time won't come to a slaughterhouse. And we've got entirely too many troublemakers here. Too many 40-year-old adolescents, felons, power drinkers, and trustees of modern chemistry. It's going to change.
Man, that sure sounds good. But a lot of the guys who come in here, we can't handle one-on-one. Even two-on-one.
Don't worry about it. All you have to do is follow 3 simple rules. 1, never underestimate your opponent. Expect the unexpected. 2, take it outside. Never start anything inside the bar unless it's absolutely necessary. And 3, be nice.
Come on.
If somebody gets in your face and calls you a cocksucker, I want you to be nice.
Okay.
Ask him to walk. Be nice. If you won't walk, walk him, but be nice. If you can't walk him, one of the others will help you, and you'll both be nice. I want you to remember that it's a job. It's nothing personal.
Uh-huh. Being called a cocksucker isn't personal?
No. It's 2 nouns combined to elicit a prescribed response.
I wonder if somebody calls my mama a whore.
Is she? I want you to be nice until it's time to not be nice.
Well, how are we supposed to know when that is?
You won't. I'll let you know. You are the bouncers, I am the cooler. All you have to do is watch my back and each other's. Take out the trash.
All right, that was a clip from the 1989, not the 2024 remake, the 1989 original Roadhouse. So let's call upon our old pal Ed Jones again to find out what he thought about Roadhouse way back in May of 1989. Old Ed gave Roadhouse 2 stars, same rating as Field of Dreams. Patrick Swayze exudes earthy charm, but is undertaxed as a good old boy hired to clean up a tough saloon in a small Missouri town. Ben Gazzara plays a corrupt big shot. Plenty of fights, 0 credibility. Okay, so that's what Ed thought about Roadhouse. Seemed like he kind of was a little cold on it. But yeah, he basically summed it up. Patrick Swayze is playing a legendary bouncer / cooler named Dalton, recruited down to Jasper, Missouri, a bar called the Double Deuce. It's been a rowdy bar, having troubles. He's called in to kind of make it a functioning establishment. Finds out Ben Gazzara is kind of running the town. He's kind of like the local mob boss, extorting the local businesses. Meets up with a very attractive local doctor, Kelly Lynch. We find out a little bit about his mentor, played by Sam Elliott, and lots of head busting, lots of Tai Chi, lots of pleated khakis. Brian, why don't you go first on the 1989 remembrances? What are your remembrances of Roadhouse in '89?
Well, when I started working up in the main building of the Virginians, Roadhouse was one of the movies that was playing there. I vowed when I got into that main building, I'm going to watch all 4 movies that are playing here because, as you mentioned before, they were free, so I want to watch them all. Unfortunately, as I was going through all the movies, because I was only working on the weekends, I didn't get to Roadhouse in time before we moved over to the RC Movie Center Fredericksburg at the end of June, and Roadhouse did not make the transition over to the new theater. I ended up not being able to see the movie in 1989, so yet another movie I did not see in '89. I can say I saw a couple clips because when I would walk in there to kind of clean the theater, I saw a handful of clips of the movie, but I really wasn't that interested in seeing it either because of the whole Patrick Swayze as an action star thing. He was coming off of Dirty Dancing. I didn't know him very well. The action movies I watched had like Chuck Norris in it or Jean-Claude Van Damme, or I really didn't think it was any good. I didn't hear very good reviews from what I could gather when it came out. So it wasn't like I was that excited either. So I didn't see it at the Virginians. And so I never actually ended up seeing it at all then until this podcast, actually.
Unlike Field of Dreams, which I ran out like an eager beaver to see, having played Little League Baseball, Roadhouse I did not see either, or at least not in its entirety. I think I only saw bits and pieces when I was doing my Usher walkthrough. But like you, I was also a little suspicious of Swayze being sold to us as an action star after Dirty Dancing. I'd seen him in like Red Dawn and a couple of other things, and so I was like, yeah, this guy, I don't know about this. He's no Arnold, he's no Sly, I don't know. But more than that, already at age 16, I was kind of trying to distance myself already at that time from anything that felt like too redneck, because that was just an unfortunate fact of daily life where we live. So I wasn't all excited to go see a movie about a bunch of folks that looked like and acted like and were very rowdy like. Not only the people in our hometown, but the people that came to our theater. And that theater was always the most trashed. I do remember that. So people were having a good time there. But it wasn't until many years later, after I had kind of gotten some distance sort of from my southern-ish upbringing, that I'm like, let me watch it for the first time now and kind of see what's going on. I had like a sort of an 80s action binge that I did somewhere like in the 2010s. And that time I liked it. I was kind of shocked. It's got some rough and tumble sort of like redneck charms, and it works kind of as an action movie. So I was kind of surprised. What did I think watching it in 2024? Well, Brian mentioned cult movie, and I think like any true cult movie, Roadhouse's flaws have kind of become attributes with age. So what sort of seemed ridiculous back then, and I think what a lot of people, including Ed, had the beef with, was the unbelievability that there was this kind of like hush-hush underground culture of like bar bouncers that would, be called in across state lines, no less, to clean up bars that have become too rowdy. But, with age, that's the thing, this sort of ridiculous aspect is what's made it become special. The character of Dalton, I think he's a great sort of man from nowhere character who's kind of dropped into this Jasper, Missouri Double Deuce setting. I mean, he's still very much a redneck himself, but he's kind of like king of the rednecks. He's like the most refined redneck of the bunch. He practices Tai Chi. He apparently studied philosophy at NYU, although he doesn't ever really say exactly what branch of philosophy. He doesn't drink. He only drinks black coffee. He drives a Mercedes that he hides under a tarp from a lot of the movie, so he can kind of seem like, fit in with the crowd and seem like a common man. Of course, we mentioned earlier on, he's got these great bouncer cooler rules, his 3 rules, which he kind of breaks, I would argue, pretty quickly in the movie himself. Of course, there's the be nice until it's time to not be nice. There's the take it outside no matter what you do. If someone's causing trouble, try to get them outside before you do anything. And what was the other one? Always expect the unexpected, right?
Yes, I believe that's also a rule on Big Brother.
Oh boy, you've really just dragged this podcast down into the doldrums. Anyway, I'll pretend I didn't hear Brian say that. So he's king of the rednecks, kicking ass and ripping throats in pleated khakis. The movie's over testosterone, over sex. It's proudly white trash, although not racist or really even political at all, I would argue, in any way. And I think it works. I wasn't down with the Swayze casting back then. Now, on 2024 reviewing, I think he's just right. Swayze kind of just leans into the Dalton mythos and ridiculousness and gives like a completely unironic performance, which I think is kind of what you need to sell this, and that's kind of what probably has helped make it a cult movie. He's never winking at the audience. I think he's also enjoying kind of tarnishing his sort of squeaky clean post Dirty Dancing sort of sex symbol persona, and particularly the sex scene with Kelly Lynch, where they're basically having sex against a fireplace, and it starts out they're kind of dancing and it turns into sex, so it's literal true Dirty Dancing is happening. Who else we got in here? It's not all about Swayze. Kelly Lynch, gorgeous, despite looking like she was dipped in a vat of mousse and then put in a tanning bed to dry. She kind of has the thankless sort of like, I'm not just a dumb blonde, I'm a dumb blonde doctor 80s love interest role. But she handles it as best she can, kind of knows, like, I'm in a guy's movie, let the boys be boys. I'm just going to kind of embrace it. And, I'll save, the more hardcore acting, the more nuanced approach for Drugstore Cowboy later that year. Great supporting cast. John Doe from X is a sleazy skimming bartender. Sam Elliott is kind of a obvious choice, but still great as Dalton's wizened bouncer cooler mentor. As a Cassavetes fan, I like old Ben Gazzara. Seems like he's having a lot of fun being dastardly while collecting a paycheck. I enjoy the Jeff Healey as the in-house bar band at the Double Deuce, and I thought it was a good choice to just stick with one band for the duration. It gives like a nice framework for the movie and the action, instead of going with dotting this thing with a bunch of different bands, which was probably tempting because then you can have a soundtrack that has a lot of different acts in it. I liked the Gazzara's henchman Jemmy Reno, played by an actor named Marshall Teague, because when he tells Dalton, I used to fuck guys like you in prison before they get into a fight, you really believe him. And in the remake with Conor McGregor, the MMA guy, UFC guy or whatever, I don't think I would believe that line if he said it. But I definitely believed Marshall Teague. My one beef, well, the legendary lakeside fight scene, the one where Dalton famously rips the guy I just mentioned's throat out. I feel like if you're going to rip a throat in a movie, and you're going to have a whole backstory about this is not the first time he's ripped a throat out of his opponent. He actually got into some trouble back in Memphis doing it with a married woman's husband. I feel like if you're going to do that, you're going to rip a guy's throat out, there has to be a close-up of that dangling throat in Dalton's hand after he rips it out. If you're going to go there, why not show it? And when I watched it this time, I was actually waiting for it after he did it, and it didn't come. And I'm like, am I watching like a clean version of Roadhouse? Is this like a TV version or something? And nope. I don't think it ever existed. I think that's my one problem, because it's already that type of movie. Why not show us the dangling throat just going blah, 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 just in his hand right there? Would love it. Other than that, no notes. Brian, what were your 2024 thoughts?
This is the first movie I actually watched for our prequel podcast. We finally got to go into the 80s as opposed to the 90s. All the movies from before were always like 90s movies. So now we could actually say we're watching 80s movies albeit late in the 80s. And I would say it was a welcome return to the 80s, just because this is definitely an 80s movie. No denying it. It's got that great 80s energy. And of course, by that, I mean lots of boobs and middle-aged white guys. I mean, really, they don't make movies like this anymore. I mean, when you watch this type of movie, and we've watched movies as a family here, some random movie we'll pick for the whole family to watch. And every time we pick a movie from the 80s, there always seems to be lots of unnecessary nudity, and usually it's all the old white guys that are getting a lot of younger women. And it's a weird thing to watch movies from the 80s because nowadays they just don't do that anymore. Maybe for good reason, but you could definitely tell when you're watching a movie from the 80s. And that's definitely what I got from this. I'm like, okay, well, here, this is a welcome return to this old school movie making. Where you have people ripping the throat out of other people and everything else. So this time around, I'm like, sure, I'll buy Swayze is doing this. Why not? And I think you're right. He did a good job. I definitely buy into his philosophical bouncer character, and I think that's what I really enjoyed about this movie. I didn't really know that this is what it was going to be about. I kind of knew it was a bunch of bar fights or whatever. So whatever. But the idea of having this underground world of bouncers, that's what probably fascinated me the most. And I wish they would do more about, like, the idea of people have to be brought in from out of state just to calm down the people in this bar. I mean, that's how out of control this bar must be. And it's obviously a little ludicrous to think of this, but that's what you kind of want in this type of movie. And then not only do they have him coming in to clean up the bar, they bring in Sam Elliott as kind of his mentor, and he's in there to help control this rowdy gang of people. And so that kind of fascinated me with that, creating this mythos of this underground world. It's like John Wick with the underground world of hitmen. Here's your underground world of bouncers, which again, just saying that sounds silly. If you're willing to go in on that, then it's a lot of fun. I thought the movie had a little bit of the convoluted stuff in the middle with the motivations of why they're trying to constantly, all the bad guys are like, they want to destroy this roadhouse, and I believe it has something to do with the girl involved and all that stuff, but it doesn't really matter why, because much like all the other fight movies that I've always watched, you just want to get from one fight to the next. So there is a little bit of dragging in the middle. Other than that, you get to the ending, and then you get the throat ripping out. I agree with you. I'd love to see the throat ripping out, but I wasn't as disappointed as you were. But then they go over to hit the guy's mansion at the end, and then there's this, ultra-violent ending. A bear falls on somebody at one point. A big stuffed bear falls on somebody. I mean, it's just chaos at the end there. And so that's always fun to watch.
So before we register our trusty grease stain bow tie rating, do you want to give your really quick thoughts on the 2024 remake? Because I know we both watched it. I think you even watched the remake before you, for the first time, watched the original Roadhouse, right?
Yeah, and I kind of wish I watched them back to back. I would have liked to have watched the 89 version and then watched this one. To be fair, I didn't think I was going to like the 89 version. So I was like, oh, what the hell? I'll just watch the new one. What difference does it make? Watching the new one, if I say that the 1989 version is kind of like your generic 80s movie, at least the plot-wise and all that stuff, the 2024 is definitely just the same thing. Like, it embodies what a modern-day movie is like in a very generic way. I mean, they try to do something new with the character, but it's nothing new idea-wise. It's what every movie nowadays are doing. Let's sprinkle a little diversity here and there. Does it make a difference? Not really. Let's just make it more diverse, less middle-aged white men and less boobs. And so they just basically made it not an 80s movie, and all the action's all CGI enhanced. The fights are trying to be more impactful with the modern day, camera swinging around and all that stuff, which I don't mind that stuff. The fights are very visceral, and they're all kind of like fun to watch. So I didn't hate the remake in that regard. I just think it was an unnecessary remake. I would say if you had a choice, definitely go back and watch the 89 version. There's no need to watch the new one at all.
Well, I definitely agree with that sentiment, and I think I disliked the remake a lot more than you. It kind of set off a lot of my what's the point feelings about a lot of remakes and IP extensions. It's like to the point where when you remake the thing and you kind of lose the things that made the original movie special to begin with, why bother? Why even call it Roadhouse? What I'm getting at is what the remake gets wrong. I think it got a lot of things wrong, but just to point out a couple really quick ones. First off, you don't start your movie about ripped bouncers beating the shit out of each other with chubby, pasty, badly tattooed Post Malone as your opening image, sort of non-fight, where he just kind of gives up in the first 5 minutes when he just sees Jake Gyllenhaal walk in. So, talk about starting with a whimper instead of a bang. And then it kind of just gets worse from there. They relocate the signature roadhouse from Missouri, kind of like the Ozarks, to Florida. Probably, helped with the whole Amazon executive going like, we're kind of don't feel right about making this a movie in the Deep South. Let's put it in Florida. That's still kind of weird and kind of in the South, but a different vibe. But they made the actual roadhouse before it was like this very cramped, claustrophobic, like little small, wasn't even 2 stories. It might have been a 1 story. And the new one is like this sort of open air beachside monstrosity that looks like a theme restaurant to me. I don't know if it looked like that to you.
Yeah.
So you kind of lose all of that like dirty, sweaty claustrophobia and danger from the original. I mean, it gave them, I guess, more room to throw people around. I understand why they bring in the MMA element, the UFC element. They can attach themselves to a sporting league and an event and a pre-existing interest. But doing that, making Gyllenhaal a boxer, the whole like I killed a guy in the ring backstory, which by the way has been done in a zillion movies, even tangentially related to like fighting or boxing. We've seen it a million times. To substitute the whole underground bouncer, legendary bouncer thing with that, I think just it sort of misses the whole point about why people liked the original Roadhouse and why it became a cult item. The digitally enhanced fights that Brian mentioned with this sort of annoying jerky punch cam, I get what they were going for. They were trying to make these fights which probably without that stuff added in post didn't look visceral enough, but to me they just seem way more fake than just the old school stunt guys throwing air punches at each other. When that's cut together, that can look really good. This one with the whole added in post sort of like punch cam or whatever, it took me right out of it. There's a lot of other stuff I didn't like about it. There's a lot of unnecessary things shoehorned into it to basically make it less a movie about white guys in the South beating the shit out of each other. A lot of the choices were like, seemed to miss the whole point of what the original movie was about. But Brian, you know what?
What's that?
Instead of a lame remake, I was thinking, like our Gen X Multiplex, the prequel, what if they made a Roadhouse prequel about Dalton's early years? The original throat ripping, the guy he got in a fight with over the married lady and killed in Tennessee by ripping his throat out. What if you made a prequel about that portion instead of this lame remake and called it Dalton, the early years, Memphis by the throat? Would you pay good money to see that, or would you keep your Amazon subscription for another month to watch that?
As long as they delved into that underbelly of the bouncer world, I'd be all in.
All right, you hear that, folks? Brian would maybe put down some coin to see this. And reminder, I said at the top of the show, I am presently unemployed, so if anybody wants to hire me to write this screenplay, Dalton the Early Years, Memphis by the Throat, I will happily do so. Okay, well, we're just rambling now, so let's get to the part that everyone really likes, the new, exciting part of Gen X Multiplex, the prequel, our bow tie ratings. Brian, what did you give the 1989 Roadhouse as your grease-stained bow tie rating?
I give it 3 grease-stained bow ties. I really enjoyed the movie. Highly recommend it.
And I gave it 3.5 beer and blood-stained bow ties. Well, that was the end of our second feature segment. Let's move on now to our third feature, Pink Cadillac.
Somebody got you some nice threads, didn't they? Alrighty then. Recognize this woman?
She looks familiar. Like someone who never really caught a break. Someone who might go crazy for a day. I wouldn't judge her. You're a cop?
Not exactly.
What do you mean, not exactly? Who the hell are you?
I'm a skip tracer, Mrs. McGuinn. I work for the bail bondsman who put up your bond. Why the hell didn't you just have your husband and some of his friends put up the money?
Look, if you're taking me back, let's get going. I can't take much more of this Elvis tribute.
That was a clip from Pink Cadillac, Well, we're going from a redneck roadhouse to a redneck road movie with Clint Eastwood's movie from 1989. Let's jump right to Ed Jones and see what he had to say about this one. Pink Cadillac, he only gave it 1.5 stars, and he says, a tired action comedy with little romantic sparkle and not much drive. Clint Eastwood stars as a roguish fugitive hunter who comes to the aid of bail-jumping mother played by Bernadette Peters. A couple of nifty car chases. He seems to like to have those little tags at the end.
Yeah, and you see what he did there with not a lot of drive. You see what he's doing there?
Yeah, I get that. Well, he's clever.
He is. Well, at least he performs a very solid function for us, which is kind of setting up the movie. Set us up a little bit more if you feel that Ed didn't do his due diligence there, Brian, on Pink Cadillac.
Well, I think this is a movie that probably really needs a bit of a setup, because if anybody out there is like me, didn't really know what this movie was about, right? It's called Pink Cadillac, and it's got Clint Eastwood in it. I think that's what most people would probably even think of if they heard that, if they even remembered the movie even existed. Basically, this movie is Clint Eastwood playing a skip tracer, which is a term I had never heard of before till I heard this movie. I always thought they were just called bounty hunters. Basically, someone who tracks down bail jumpers, right? He's on the lookout for Bernadette Peters, who's a mom who gets kind of like caught up with her husband's crazy ways and ends up skipping town instead of facing the music for her husband's counterfeiting issues. She's on the run, and Clint Eastwood then has to go and find her. And lo and behold, once they get together, there's a bit of bonding going on, and it's basically they team up what seems like as a way to kind of clear her name and kind of bring down the bad guys.
Sorry to interrupt. Let's not forget that she also, in that Pink Cadillac, has got stowed a bunch of that counterfeit money, which also later turns out to be maybe real money.
So yeah, is she guilty? Is she not guilty? I mean, does he need to bring her into justice? Does he not have to bring her into justice? Those are all of the questions you may have. But that's basically the gist of it. I did not see this one as well in 1989. Boy, we're really batting 1,000 here for me here. This movie was not a movie I was interested in at all. Again, I think the movie poster had Clint Eastwood's big mug on it with Pink Cadillac written on it. I had no idea what it was about. If I had seen the trailer, it obviously did not appeal to me. Let you know that the first time I watched it was for this podcast a week or two ago.
Where were you on the Clint Eastwood scale? Fan, not a fan at age 16? Did you have any thoughts or what?
I didn't watch a lot of like the cop movies, or like I knew he was famous for like Dirty Harry. That's what I knew of from Clint Eastwood. I had not seen any of his like 70s westerns or any of that stuff. So Clint Eastwood, the only thing I knew him from would probably have been Dirty Harry with the whole Make My Day. Other than that, so he did not register with me at all. And so him seeing him on the poster or him being marketed as the star of this movie did not make me want to see this in the least.
Well, I, like you, Brian, also did not see it back then at all. Although back then I was kind of a casual Clint fan. I had definitely seen maybe not all the Dirty Harrys, but at least a couple of them. And I think I had seen at least the Deadpool, which he did with the same director of this movie. And I was definitely a fan of Clint Clyde orangutan buddy movies. Those were on like HBO back in the day, and I had seen those. So it was kind of a casual fan. It was sort of later, definitely after Unforgiven, where I went back and did my homework and watched a lot of his westerns, although I think I had seen like maybe Pale Rider, possibly High Plains Drifter, a couple things. The reason I made Brian watch this is because at first I was like, I think this is like maybe the only, if Clint Eastwood directed movies I haven't seen, until I realized he didn't direct this.
Right.
It's Buddy Van Horn, who started out as a stunt guy, which will be kind of relevant to the new movie we're talking about later on the episode. But he was Clint's stunt guy for a lot of his other movies. He did the second of the Clint Clyde orangutan pair-ups. He did Any Which Way You Can after Every Which Way But Loose. And he did the Deadpool also. So I was wrong initially. Ooh, do I still want to watch this? Yes, now I'm committed. I guess we have to. And I was kind of curious just because it was like I had seen everything else that first month that we worked there, and this was the only outlier that I had never seen. So this is about kind of squaring the circle, finishing it out. Clint, he's 93 years old. The movie he's working on now, or I think just finished up, Juror Number 2, is rumored to be, but you never know with Clint because that dude's a workaholic. It's rumored to be his last movie. So I'm feeling like I need to kind of like tie up all my Clint sometime around now. But very curious to hear what Brian P. thought in 2024.
Thank you for sucking me into your completionist vortex.
It happens at least once an episode, and it'll continue to happen, Brian. Get used to it.
And I am starting to get used to it. And I will admit, I would not have watched this movie otherwise. So here we go. So Pink Cadillac, this is like Roadhouse. This is a very 80s movie, if you ask me. But it's just more with just a bunch of middle-aged men. There's no boobs in this movie. The thing that makes this decidedly 80s, and somewhat into the 90s, they did this a lot. There's that wildly unrealistic age gap between these the love interests in here. It's not obvious at first, but of course, when Clint Eastwood and Bernadette Peters are on the run long enough, they make a connection. At the time, he was 59 and she was 41.
I wouldn't call that inappropriate, though. I would even call it a May-December. It's within reason. They're both aged adults, right?
Yeah, I know, but there's like an 18-year age gap. Yeah, again, yes, of course it is, but it's sort of like the Pretty Woman thing. I'm like, it's an 80s thing that I always notice. And another thing that my daughters like to point out when we're watching these older movies is like, another one of these movies where the young girl's falling for the much older guy. I was looking at Ed's review again, and it says the words action comedy. I'm wondering, is there any action or is there any comedy in this movie? Because I couldn't find any. I think it was trying to be funny, but I don't think most of the jokes land in this thing. I didn't watch any of his comedy, like the ones with the chimpanzee or anything like that.
It's an orangutan, Brian, and his name is Clyde, and he wears a wristwatch. Get it right.
That's how much I don't know about it. But I have seen like Unforgiven and his more serious roles, even in the In Line of Fire, where he's playing like the more serious. Everything he did was serious after this. I don't know if he did another comedy after this, and there's probably a good reason for that. I had a hard time with the movie in general because every line delivery felt bad. Every character made stupid choices. Like everything in it is like kind of stupid, and that works when the comedy's working. Because in a comedy, yeah, you can make dumb choices because that's what's kind of the fun thing about it. But I think they thought they were being funny when all it was just like plain stupid. Everything that the Bernadette Peters character is doing is stupid. Apparently she loves her husband, and that's why she couldn't turn him in. But then the guy's threatening her, and her husband's caught up in this thing called the Brotherhood, which is kind of the big bad gang of, I guess, white supremacists.
Birthright.
Sorry, that's right.
The gang is Birthright.
Which is even more white supremacist sounding. So anyway, why she just doesn't turn them in, I don't know. She loves her husband, but then she doesn't. I don't believe that she would love her husband that much. That guy, Roy, boy, he was like the worst cardboard character I've seen in a movie. I mean, you have all these other bad guys hamming it up and chewing the scenery and all that stuff, and that guy just stood there. Everyone else is doing stuff and he's not. So I don't understand why she loved the guy. Why? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you could tell me. The guy literally in every scene he's in, he's just like standing there with this blank expression on his face. I'm not going to get bogged down in the plot mechanics like I did with Field of Dreams here. All I wanted to say is that I didn't think any of the jokes were funny. With that being said, if none of the jokes are funny and everything's falling flat, then you have to rely on the action then. And in here, the action's no good. The only time I laughed in the entire movie, the Birthright, right? Luann steals all of their money in the Pink Cadillac. They're complaining that they don't have enough money to print pamphlets. So there's this whole scene where they're complaining about, because they don't have money, they can't print pamphlets to go and recruit for their white supremacist cult that they have going on there. And so the fact that they spent like 5 minutes like complaining about the pamphlets, and they make one guy read the pamphlet and they say, is that any good? No. And so I was laughing at the fact that they didn't have their money to make their propaganda. That made me laugh a little bit. Other than that, I didn't laugh at all in the entire movie.
Well, from the sounds of it, Brian, I guess I owe you a big fat Pink apology for making you watch Pink Cadillac. Maybe I owe myself one too, as we'll probably find out. This feels like one of those 70s Clint/Clyde the Orangutan road movies made 10 to 15 years too late, with Clyde, the best part of those movies, surgically removed and replaced with Bernadette Peters, I guess, maybe Jeffrey Lewis, Juliette Lewis's dad, doing sort of a half-assed Tommy Chong impersonation as like the hippie fake ID whiz, Tommy Z. Yeah, so it's got a big gaping hole where Clyde should be. It almost felt like maybe they wrote it originally as the third movie of that trilogy, and then like but it took so long to get made. It like by the time it's like it's the 90s now. Come on, guys, let's get serious. We can't be making monkey movies forever. Clint's got to be a little bit more serious in this one, and I think that was a big mistake. I would have liked this a lot better if it was part 3 of the Clint Clyde trilogy. And Clyde was in the back seat of the Pink Cadillac for most of it. It would have veered it much more into comedy, and it wouldn't have been this kind of like in this middle gray area of blah between action and comedy, and not really satisfying either of those requirements. I'm going to say it's still not the absolute worst Clint action movie I've seen. That would be, in my opinion, The Rookie the following year with Charlie Sheen. I don't know if you ever saw that, Brian.
Yeah, I did see that one, but that's pretty bad.
So it's not, I don't think it's as bad as that, but it's definitely not top shelf squint. Clint's good at a lot of things. He's a good actor, good director, good in westerns, good as a sort of hateful cop. He is not good at doing impressions.
No. And
sadly, he attempts more than a few here. It's almost like he's auditioning for the third Fletch movie. He is no Chevy Chase. He's mostly doing like yokels, like aw shucks, kind of guys and business and like sleazy business guys when he's going to places to like try to find her. It's all like kind of variations on the same one note, and all of them are bad.
One of them has a lisp.
Yeah, and it's really unbearable. But it's made even worse because like one of the kings of impressions in the 80s and 90s is in the background of one of the shots, Jim Carrey, who was in the Deadpool. He has a cameo as like an armless post-apocalyptic Elvis impersonator, which is like maybe the highlight of the movie. For a movie about a flashy fast car, it's very slow, like Brian mentioned. And for a movie directed by a stuntman, the action is pretty generic. There are a couple scenes mostly dealing with like cars. I don't even know if there was a lot of fisticuffs in it, but nothing really stood out as like, oh, this is directed by a stunt guy, and you can tell. Whereas like Every Which Way But Loose, and especially Any Which Way You Can, there's like 20-minute fights that go through an entire town, like one fight that lasts that long, and you're like, this was definitely directed by a stunt guy. There's no traces of that in Pink Cadillac. It feels like they're kind of like tightening the belt and like, we got to get a little more serious now. Maybe Clint was, starting to angle for his Oscar that he'd eventually win and stuff like that. So it feels like it's caught between the decades. In that scene that you were talking about, I'm like, oh, this is like starting to maybe get funny, where they're critiquing the recruitment poster about like the bad lettering and the poor margins, right, and stuff, and which is kind of funny because it's like white supremacist dudes talking about it, and it almost starts to get towards that. Remember the scene in Django Unchained where the Ku Klux Klan guys are like talking about the eye holes in their hoods,
right? Yeah.
Like their wives didn't cut them right, and when are we ever going to get the eye holes right? It seemed like it was going in that direction, like, they're actually going to have some real comedy in here, but then it doesn't quite go that hard, and it doesn't really land. Bernadette Peters, I like her generally. Another odd choice because she's kind of like a natural comedian, and she just kind of disappears into the sort of usual Clint girlfriend role by the end of the movie. The one scene I have to give a slight shout out to, there was a pretty good like baby in peril scene. They're going to like look for the counterfeit money, and Bernadette Peters' baby, they think her baby is in the dumpster. It's kind of like a fake out with a bomb,
right.
But it ends up being a fake baby. But for a second or two there, it seems like there's a real baby in the dumpster that's going to be in peril, and they kind of played that out enough that I thought it was kind of funny. It's not on the level of like Raising Arizona or Baby's Day Out, Baby in Peril, but it was still kind of funny. I'm like, all right, I'll give it that. And Clyde with a wristwatch, he should have had a big old Rolex and been in this movie. Other than that, Pink Cadillac, it's got a flat tire. Sorry, Ed, I had to go there.
Oh, look at that.
So Brian, I think we kind of both know where this is going. Let me hear what your bow tie rating is for Pink Cadillac.
Well, Matt, I'm going to have to give this the lowest rating I could think of, a Diet Coke bomb. So low, it's what we used to chuck at the wall of the theater.
So you're giving it basically 0 stars, a big old stinking Diet Coke bomb.
There's no way I would suggest that anybody ever watch this. And if I had a time machine, I'd go back and try to talk you out of having me watch this for the podcast.
Wow, that is pretty severe. You're already pulling out the Diet Coke bombs this early on in our prequel series.
I'm sorry. I was squirming in my seat, wanting this thing to end. It was that painful.
Wow, that is a little harsh. I also did not like this movie, but I'm definitely kinder than you. I gave it 2 grease-stained bow ties.
2? You're just thinking of that orangutan. I think you have fond memories. You liked it better than Ed Jones. You liked it better than it.
By a half a bow tie. Yeah, I'm definitely not recommending it to anyone. This was fully came from my completionist tendencies and obviously drove Brian through the roof.
Oh, God.
Although the pink Cadillac is roofless. It's a convertible. Sorry to do that to you, Brian, and sorry I don't have a lower rating, but that's not a recommend for me.
Well, now that we've officially decided that pink Cadillac is stalled out, let's just go ahead and move on to our fourth and final 1989 feature, See No Evil, Hear No Evil.
All right, now we're gonna quit fucking around here and start talking serious. Now, you claim there was a woman present? Was there a woman present? Was there a woman present?
Oh, I'm sorry, you talking to me?
You bet your ass I'm talking to you. Was there or wasn't there?
Was there or wasn't there what?
A woman present.
I smelled a woman, but I didn't see a woman.
What about you, wise ass? Was there or wasn't there a woman? What the hell do I have to do? Take you downstairs to a private room and ask you? Huh?
He's deaf. You have to be facing him.
Oh, Jesus. All right, no more bullshit. Was there or wasn't there a woman?
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm goddamn serious.
Fuzzy Wuzzy was a woman?
What the hell is he talking about?
He reads lips. You're talking too fast.
Was there a woman present?
Yes, there was a woman present.
Why is he talking like that?
Because he's deaf, not stupid.
Can you tell me one goddamn thing about that woman?
Yes, she has the most magnificent legs I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and she smells good, too.
All right, that does it. Now, you, don't tell me you didn't hear anything, because he heard it. And you don't tell me you didn't see anything, because he saw it. Now, between the two of you, you saw and you heard everything. Now, some poor bastard's dead, so let's start answering some fucking questions here.
All right, that was a quick snippet of See No Evil, Hear No Evil, starring Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. Brian, you still hanging in there? Do you have a little mid-pod refreshment alcohol to get you through the rest of the pod? Because I think you might need it for this one.
Yeah, you know what? Talking about Roadhouse earlier made me thirsty, so...
Oh, you started drinking all the way back at Roadhouse. Well, you're ahead of me then. All right, well, let's hear what our favorite, sometimes too sober Fredericksburg Freelance Star movie critic has to say about See No Evil, Hear No Evil. He gave it 2 stars. Now, reminder, that's what he gave Field of Dreams. That's what he gave Roadhouse. He is giving See No Evil, Hear No Evil the same star rating to only a half a star more than his Pink Cadillac. And he says, funny in spots, but mostly a tired reprise, whatever. Stir Crazy's Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder get back together in this chase farce about a pair of disabled heroes, one is blind, the other is deaf, who head out of town after they're falsely accused of murder. This one's not too hard to set up. It's kind of buddy comedy. Richard Pryor is blind, Gene Wilder is deaf. They are accused of a murder. Really the MacGuffin is some kind of gold coin that is everyone's after, that gets dropped in their presence after a body goes down near Gene Wilder's newsstand that he works at. So they get the blame from that, eventually realize that everyone's after this gold coin, and hijinks ensue, as they say. Whether or not they're funny hijinks, I guess, is a matter of taste. Joan Severance is kind of like, I guess she's sort of the bad guy / gal who's after this coin with, unfortunately, trigger warning, folks, Kevin Spacey, which I was not prepared for. But anyway, 1989 Remembrances. I did see this movie in 89. This is one of those ones where I cashed in my I work at a movie theater now, I can see shit for free chip, probably in the first couple weeks when we started working there. From what I recall, I was a little disappointed. I had been a fan of the pairing of Wilder and Pryor on definitely Stir Crazy, because that thing used to play like nuts on like early era cable. I don't think I'd seen Silver Streak, which I saw years later, but I definitely liked Stir Crazy. That's right, we bad. They used to play that trailer over and over, and then the movie. Kind of I think excited to see it, but it had been a pretty long lapse since Stir Crazy, so not super excited. But I did see it, and I think I was a little underwhelmed then, other than the fact that I didn't have to pay for it. What about you in 1989, Brian?
So finally, a movie I actually saw in 1989.
Oh, wow. Is this the first one on the podcast?
Yeah, and the main reason for that is because, remember, I didn't move up into the main building until sometime in June, and so this was still playing when I moved up there, so all the other movies were just had either left or on the way out. I have fond memories of watching it. You said you didn't like it back then, but I remember this might have been the first movie I cashed in my free movie watching ability since I worked at the theater, mainly because it was a comedy. I kind of was a fan of Gene Wilder, I'd say. I had seen Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein because I was kind of a Mel Brooks fan back then. And I liked Richard Pryor because my friend Darren and I, we would watch Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy stand up all the time. I think I was kind of interested in seeing that, and again, as a fan of Gene Wilder especially, because I still love Gene Wilder. I saw it that one time, and every time I've thought about the movie, I've always had fond memories. Just like, you know what, funny movie, I liked it. Courtney actually quotes from the movie quite often. It's the quote where it's like somebody's fishing through Richard Pryor's pocket, and he goes, "I don't know what you're looking for, but it's a little bit to the right."
Wait a minute. In what context does Courtney use this quote?
To be funny, I don't know. And she actually gets it wrong. She says, "I don't know what you're looking for, but it's a little bit to the left." And when I watch this movie, I'm like, "Oh, Courtney, it's actually to the right." And she goes, "I don't care. I say it the way I say it." It's anytime this movie somehow comes up and this movie has come up in conversation for some odd reason over the past 20 some odd years. Fond memories of watching it.
Okay. 2024 rewatch thoughts. What did I think? You say you fondly remember the movie then, although I was kind of, I didn't hate it. I was kind of neutral. But watching it this time, maybe not fond remembers of the movie, but do I fondly remember the days when New York City had an OTB on every block? I had actually forgotten, weirdly, that like half this movie, or maybe even more, takes place in New York City or New Jersey or both. For some reason, I had it in my head. Maybe it's just, and this might be because that's when I did my walkthroughs, were towards at the end of the movie, but I had remembered it as being mostly taking place at that kind of like backwoods compound at the end.
Right, yeah.
So I was initially watching it this time kind of pleasantly surprised, like, an 89 like shot on location in New York movie, which is rarer and rarer to see these days. And that's so close to when like I actually went to college, that it's nice. I'm like, a lot of the things in the movie look very similar to like what they look like 2 years later when I went to school. So I was vibing with it a little bit in the first like 10 minutes or so. And then the jokes started and the vibing stopped. I caught the opening credits once I got over the fact that like, hey, it's an on-location New York movie. I was quickly like, it took 6 writers, including Gene Wilder.
Yeah, I saw that.
To come up with this.
Apparently he had to be part of the rewrite in order to do the movie.
That's a lot of writers for the quality of jokes that were being thrown at you. It's it's a blind guy, deaf guy humor. Things that like comedy has been mining for like decades. So, but you can find new ways to do that, and many movies and TV shows do. I'm not so sure that this one found a lot of them, maybe here and there. But either way, like a movie with this lowbrow of a concept, and I'm fine with lowbrow concepts if you really mind them, but a movie with this concept, I don't think should be 1 second over 90 minutes. And this one was. It was more like in the 100 range. And I think it's just like the cutting in this is just really slow. There's a lot of dead space between the jokes. And the script was just never going to be that funny, but I think some faster cutting in the dialogue would have sold some of the gags a little better, because you're not just like waiting for the next thing and watching just like empty reactions. Cutting is especially critical in comedies, and timing. And it felt like the timing was just really off with these, where they were letting things like linger on their reactions. Like if we just keep the camera, Pryor as a blind guy is just going to give us great facial expressions that are just going to make it sing. And I just felt like they didn't really come. And for Gene Wilder, too. It just felt like there was some dead air that never was removed from the movie. This gold coin thereafter. Why wait until like the last 10 minutes of the movie, like reveal that it's really like some kind of like top secret government superconductor. Because it's like such a bland MacGuffin that they're chasing for 3/4 of the movie. It feels like if they had said that up front, maybe it could have given you a little extra suspense or interest or something. Even if they didn't follow through on it, like that there was something more important than maybe an expensive gold coin that everyone was after.
No, I have that written down right here as well. I'm like, the gold coin is really a superconductor?
Yeah,
Whatever.
but they reveal it like in the last 5 or 10 minutes
like,
and then do absolutely nothing with it. I'm like, that could have helped, guys.
Yeah.
I was actually waiting for someone to like unwrap it like one of those gold coin chocolates and just pop it in their mouth. But this one just seemed to be such a throwaway MacGuffin that it's almost like, why even bring up that it actually has some intrigue or value if you're not going to reveal it until like when the movie's almost over? It seemed a little strange. To give it a little bit of credit, towards the end there was a sort of a funny like blind guy versus blind guy gunfight that I thought was pretty good. Brian, I have to ask you this, and I want you to be honest. Are you ready for a little honesty?
Sure.
Now you said you were working inside the theater when this movie played, right?
Yes.
Did you time all of your usher walks to the Joan Severance shower scene?
Quite possibly.
Kind of like how Jeff timed all his walks in Pretty Woman to the Julia Roberts bathtub scene. Right. Because you know what? I think that's the only thing anybody or most people, other than Courtney, I guess, will remember from this movie. Like as soon as the build-up started, like when he entered the hotel room, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I remember what I remember about this movie now. But, reminder, I was a 16-year-old boy, lots of hormones going on. Brian, let's hear your 2024 thoughts on See No Evil, Hear No Evil.
All right, hang on just a second. It is sad, is what I'm going to say. I had such fond memories of this movie. Unfortunately, watching it this time, I did not find it nearly as funny. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even consider this movie a comedy anymore. It would probably be a tragedy for the fact that 2 comic geniuses were wasted in this horribly bad movie. You're right about like the timing and everything was really bad. Everything about this just seemed off. And I thought about just when you were talking about how there's like 6 writers on them, and one of them was Gene Wilder. And I remember reading that he refused to do this movie a couple times. He said he had to be on the script. He had to be able to rewrite it because he wanted to make sure that it was appropriate. He didn't want to offend anybody in the blind or deaf communities, which is understandable, because he wasn't going to touch a property that would probably be exploitive. Maybe he kind of softened a lot of the jokes if he was that concerned with the way it was coming off. Because remember, these are the people that were in like Blazing Saddles. So Richard Pryor, helped write Blazing Saddles, and Gene Wilder was in Blazing Saddles. So you had all this like kind of subversive humor and all that stuff. And then here you go, they have them doing this movie, which could have some really good, edgy comedy to it. But I guess for fear of offending anybody, maybe the jokes were kind of softened a bit. And maybe that's what kind of took away from it. And then all of a sudden you have this kind of bland version of what could have been very funny. So I think that's where the problem comes in. And also, the plot is kind of like all over the place a little bit. I get it with a comedy like this. You just need to set up the scenario. Okay, let's get him in this scene, and let's have him be funny. And then let's get him from point A to point B. The cops can chase him, and then we'll do another funny scene. We'll do a funny scene in the prison or whatever, in the jailhouse. I get that, but it just, none of it worked. There are a couple lines that I still laugh about. And I think Gene Wilder does a good job. And I think Richard Pryor does a good job, too. They both are pulling it off, and they're trying kind of their best with kind of like really bad material. I still like both of the actors, and I still think they're funny people. It's just so sad to see them not be funny. Unlike Pink Cadillac, where I didn't expect Clint Eastwood to be funny at all. Here, I know that they can be funny, so that's where it's kind of frustrating. At one point, their car, right, they're being chased, the cops are chasing them, and their car sails into a trash barge, right? They fly off, and they land in this trash barge, and there's some comedy about that. And then the very next scene, they're pushing this car down the road, trying to hide the car. I'm like, how the hell did they get the car off the trash barge? And why did they just leave it on the trash barge? Again, not something I should be thinking about when I'm watching a movie, especially a comedy, when you're like, who cares, just let it go. But it really bothered me. I'm like, how the hell did they get the car all the way off of the trash barge? Finger guns show up a couple times in this podcast. In Field of Dreams, when Kevin Costner's character goes to Terrence Mann, James Earl Jones' place, he tries to kind of kidnap him. And at one point, he puts his finger in his jacket pocket, like to pretend it's a gun. And as most people do, or would think, James Earl Jones just goes, whatever, show me the gun. And he's like, no, I'm not going to show you the gun. He's like, that's not a gun. And of course, you wouldn't believe somebody that has their finger pointed at you in a jacket would be a gun. It's stupid. No one would believe that. In this movie, however, it's convincing. They're walking around. The person really thinks that the finger in the pocket is a gun. So I thought that was kind of lame. You know, of course, that doesn't have any comedy, you know, to it whatsoever. But then, not only
let me interrupt. I mean, it's a finger gun that's mistaken as an erection.
Well, I was going to say
is what the comedy becomes.
Well, and that's what I said. And then it leads into a boner joke. So that's the thing, is that it does lead into a boner joke. So that's what I thought of the movie.
Well, Brian, I think I know where this is going, but I'm still a little curious. After that Diet Coke bomb you threw at Pink Cadillac, I am curious to see if you're a little lighter, because you really can't be any harsher than a Diet Coke bomb. If you're a little lighter on See No Evil, Hear No Evil, what's your grease-stained bow tie rating?
Based on the fact that I still do like the actors, and based on probably some nostalgia factor, I will not give it the Diet Coke bomb. I will give it a modest 1 grease-stained bow tie.
Huh, how after all that am I still a little above you? After all the disparaging things.
It's not a good movie. I mean, would you recommend this movie?
Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm starting to feel like I'm maybe more lenient than you on a lot of these old, late 80s movies. You can probably guess what mine is, but I gave it 1.5 grease-stained bow ties, which is not good. It is certainly not a recommendation, but it's not a cesspool. There are a couple of stray funny jokes. Probably no reason to seek out this pretty hard to find movie. So that was the end of our main feature movies for 1989. Now we're going to move on to a little segment we like to call, kind of a new segment, called the Also Ran Rundown. If you remember, old listeners might remember we used to do something when we turned into a monthly podcast where we did the calendar rundown. Sometimes that would get a little out of hand. These were movies that weren't our main features that we may still have watched, and we gave like little mini reviews. Well, this time, those reviews are going to get even more mini, to the point where there's not really a review. We're going to use our newly patented grease-stained bow tie rating system and maybe give you a little quick hit about what it's about, maybe not even that. But the catch is, in order to keep this a tight little segment, we're going to attempt to keep this under 2 minutes. We're going to try to tell you the other movies of interest that came out in May of 1989 that we may or may not have revisited for the podcast to either refamiliarize ourselves with them or watch them for the first time. We may not hit every single thing that came out in May of 1989, but we're probably going to hit the majority of them by date. So Brian, what do you think? Are you ready to start this new segment? Do we have the timer all queued up?
We do. Okay,
so Brian, start the timer now. Okay, May 5th, 1989, we have How to Get Ahead in Advertising, starred Richard E. Grant with a big boil that takes over his entire life. I gave it 3.5 boil-stained bow ties. What did you give it?
I gave it 2.5 still grease-stained bow ties.
Okay, we got Lost Angels, starring Ad Rock, Adam Horovitz as a juvenile delinquent in Los Angeles. I gave it 1.5 graffiti-spattered bow ties. Brian?
I did not see it. Then on May 12th, 1989, we had Earth Girls Are Easy, basically a fever dream with a bunch of horny aliens coming down to Earth. Matt, what'd you give it?
I gave it 3 grease-stained bow ties.
Oh, I gave it 2.5. Did enjoy it, though.
Okay, and then on May 19th, we have a movie called Cold Feet, starring Tom Waits, Keith Carradine. A little hard to find one. I gave it 2 grease-stained bow ties, or maybe Turkish figs, because Tom Waits seems to be really obsessed with Turkish figs in that movie. Brian?
I gave that one the Diet Coke bomb.
And that's a big fat 0 for a little known and now no one's going to see a movie called Cold Feet. How I Got Into College, a comedy about the horrors of taking the SAT, apparently. I gave it 1.5 grease-stained bow ties. Brian?
I did not see that one.
It's a pass. Okay, next we have Miracle Mile. Anthony Edwards, Mayor Winningham, The Apocalypse Happening in Downtown LA. I gave it 3.5 irradiated bow ties. Brian?
I agree with you, 3.5 bow ties, one of the best this time. Oh, and then we have on May 24th, 1989, everyone knows this one, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Don't need to really go into that one, I don't think. Matt, what do you think?
It's a great movie. I gave it 3.5 grease-stained bow ties. Not my favorite Raiders one, but still top notch.
It is my favorite Indiana Jones movie, so I gave it 4 grease-stained bow ties.
Okay, let's hit that timer. Where are we at?
Minute 53. Look at that.
Whoa, we actually got it in on our first try at under 2 minutes, folks. That is impressive. Can we do that every month? We'll have to find out next month, and you'll have to find out if you choose to listen again.
Well, I'm not the kind to kiss and tell.
but I've been seen with Farrah. I've never been with anything less than a 9. So fine, I've been on fire with Sally Field, gone fast with a girl named Bo, but somehow they just don't end up as mine. It's a death-defying life I lead. I take my chances. I die for living in the movies and TV. But the hardest thing I ever do is watch my leading ladies kiss some other guy while I'm bandaging my knee. I might fall from a tall building, I might roll a brand new car, 'cause I'm the unknown stuntman that made Redford such a star.
Now we're going to move into the future, which is basically the present, 2024. We promised you we would hit at least one, if not two, new movies for 2024 that came out. We actually saw this movie together in Fredericksburg. I came down to hang out with Brian. We went to the old theater, which we've done before in the past on the podcast near the end of the 1991 one. So it's not the first time we've been back and revisited the theater, but it's definitely the first time in 2024. The Fall Guy, starring Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, I guess you could call it a remake of the 80s Lee Majors series, where he played a stuntman for the movies who also moonlighted as a bounty hunter. As we talk about it, you might find out how much of a remake it really is. But that's in name at least, and it does say, on Wikipedia and various other places, that yes, it is supposed to be a remake of that series, which I was a fan of when I was a kid. I was definitely a fan of the theme song. I don't know that I watched the whole series, but I remember, I think they used to pair it up with Dukes of Hazzard on the same night. But it was a childhood favorite. Brian, do you have any thoughts or opinions, or did you even watch the original Fall Guy TV series?
I did not watch the original Fall Guy series. I knew the theme song, of course. I think that shows. I did watch Dukes of Hazzard, though, but I think I watched that like during the day on reruns or something like that. But I did not catch the Fall Guy. I was more of a Bionic Man. The $6 Million Man, if you're going to go back to Lee Majors' roles.
Okay, and while we're talking about it, do you want to give like a quick what is it basically about? It's sort of obvious. It's like kind of right there in the title, but just a quick setup for those who may not be keeping tabs on the new 2024 movies. By the way, this is the first official summer release of 2024.
So yeah, this is definitely being marketed as the like big summer blockbuster. I mean, you got Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt, you got Aaron Taylor Johnson, you got all these big names in this movie. Ryan Gosling is a stuntman who doubles for Aaron Taylor Johnson on the movies, and Aaron Taylor Johnson plays the big obnoxious Hollywood type that claims he does his own stunts, but really has a great stunt guy that does all the work. And then Emily Blunt's kind of like starts off as a camera person who becomes a director, but she's kind of like the love interest for Ryan Gosling. But there's this, accident that puts him out of commission, Ryan Gosling, and then later on he kind of like stops being a fall guy. He hurts himself, he's embarrassed, whatever it is. He gets brought back into being the stuntman on Emily Blunt's new movie, again doubling for Aaron Taylor Johnson. But once he gets there, there's kind of like this mystery and intrigue as to Aaron Taylor Johnson's character's gone, and so now he's got to go find him, and it's mixed in with a bunch of light humor and him trying to get back together with Emily Blunt and what happened with that relationship. And so it's very light fare. At the beginning of the movie, we get to see David Leitch and Ryan Gosling talking about how this is kind of like the love letter to stuntmen, because David Leitch used to be a stunt coordinator, and the movie's all about that. So you get a lot of meta movie stuff built into it as well. You're basically watching them make a movie with a stunt guy and, all that fun intrigue.
Right away, within the first couple minutes, I kind of knew this from seeing the trailer. I'm like, this is going to be not resemble at all my childhood memories of the TV series. I could just tell from the tone of it and how they were going for like big, grand, set piece action scenes and lots of, witty banter back and forth. Yes, in the series, he was a stuntman who, each week would take a new bounty hunting related assignment. That does not happen here. Leave those expectations at the door. You could argue that Ryan Gosling wants to find out like the reasoning behind why, if his injury was a setup, he has to kind of take on a bounty hunting type role to go look for Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. But there's no other. He never at any point is doing that really on the side. It's for his own purposes that he kind of bounty hunts, or at least plays amateur detective in the movie. So you're not going to get that. And it makes sense. This is a one-off 2-hour movie, 2-hour plus. It's not a week-to-week, we need new assignments for him each time. And really in the series, the bounty hunting was in the foreground. The stunt stuff was kind of like a little bit more of the window dressing from what I remember. And it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of more the movie making aspect and being on set is front and center. And I would even argue the banter that happens when the camera is not rolling on film sets for the first part of the movie takes over even more the mechanics of like doing the stunts. There's a lot of banter going on in the first half hour of this, to the point I'm like, okay, they're really foregrounding the romantic comedy aspects of this. And I'm like, it's working. Both, Emily Blunt and Ryan Gosling are very charming and they're selling it. But it started to become a little tiresome. And some of the things don't land. Some of it's like, all right, we don't need this much. And with lesser actors, I think I would have gotten a lot more annoyed. But both Gosling and Emily Blunt were able to make it sing and like sell it, and while keeping it kind of light. And the action itself, when we do get to it and when it becomes like kind of the main focus of it, no one would be surprised that I'm down on the overuse of CGI these days. But for this, it's a pretty good mishmash of practical stunts and CGI. Definitely more practical stunts than usual in a movie of this size. And yes, that has a lot to do with the director being a former stunt coordinator, stunt guy. And, what's there that you can tell is fully practical, is well done. Kind of like we gave ourselves rules for the prequel series. I almost wish there was a version of this movie where David Leitch had pledged to, I'm going to try to make a movie like in the old days with all practical effects. And let's see what that looks like these days. I know that's a big ask, and I know I'm never going to get it, but while I was watching it, there was a part of me going like, yeah, this looks good. This looks better than usual, but that's definitely CGI. Everything surrounding, the cars that are hurtling into each other and whatnot is all fake. Last but not least, I don't think this is probably much of a spoiler. You probably see it coming. Old fans of the show, they do march out old lead majors and what looked to be Heather Thomas, but it was very quick, standing next to him as cameos at the end. And I was like, they gotta play the theme song. And I was like, it's gonna be the credits if it's not right up top. And yes, they did play it, though it was a new version of the song, which I wasn't super excited about. I would rather just have heard the old Lee Majors version. But apparently it's Blake Shelton, who I think he hosts on one of those like singing shows, right? I don't know really much about this guy, but I was a little bummed that it was his version. But whatever, I understand why they did that. So that's my thoughts on it. I'll wait to hear yours, but until I give my grease stained bow tie rating, Brian.
Yeah, you summed it up pretty much. A lot of things I thought of as well. It starts off with the romance between the two of them, but you're right. Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt making cute faces at each other, and there's a little comedy in there. It works for me perfectly fine. I knew that obviously action had to be coming. Even through the previews, I knew it was coming. So by the time it got to the action, it was welcomed, and I do appreciate all of the practical stunts. I don't mind the CGI. It was interesting because they did show during the credit scenes. They would show like the practical stunts being done and show the blue screen behind it. Almost they weren't hiding the fact that they were using CGI, obviously. But you're right, it was mainly for background stuff as opposed to the actual stunt itself. I think he was actually kind of making fun of CGI because the movie they're making in the movie, every time they cut to what that movie looks like, it is just nothing but CGI, right? I mean, I think it's kind of like alien spaceships everywhere, the color changes and all that stuff. And the one practical stunt that they're usually shooting for that, they show that, but it's completely surrounded by all of this, CGI crap, and it all looks bad. It looks like it's going to be a really horrible movie, right? The funny thing is they keep on saying you're making a great movie, but the movie looks like trash, right? I mean, I think he meant it to not look like a very good movie that she's making. We're talking about the stunts here, and it's about the people, so who cares if the movie she's making is garbage? But it really looks like garbage. With a garbage actor, Aaron Taylor Johnson plays the pompous ass of a person. So to me, it looked like he was kind of making fun of that idea of here's what stunts look like in modern day movies, but he made a movie that had a lot more practical stunts in it. And I was shocked because the end credits, I don't know if you noticed how short they were. Nowadays, you sit in the movies, like if you're watching a Marvel movie and you're waiting for that stupid end scene at the very end, you have to sit there for like 10, 15 minutes while you see every CGI house go by. Like, oh, this one did this one sequence, and then here's the one other sequence that has like 800 people.
Lots of compositors.
Right. Like all of a sudden I saw them showing like, filmed on, Panflex or whatever. I was like, the credits are already over. I was shocked at how short the ending credits were, because they didn't have a million different production houses working on a million different sequences. So for that, I'll give them credit for. Anyone that liked all the Barbie stuff from last year, that liked Ryan Gosling, they'll go to here and not be offended. There's nothing bad about it. So I think it's a good start to the summer season. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good time at the movies.
Do you want to give your grease-stained bow tie rating for the 2024 Fall Guy now?
But I gave it 3 grease-stained bow ties. I thought it was a nice, fun summer movie. I would recommend it.
Pretty close to mine. This is where this one was kind of tough. I wavered back and forth a little bit. Gets a little frustrating, but I gave it just under. I gave it 2.5 grease-stained bow ties, which to me is still like, it's solid, pretty much hovering around good. So I'm giving it a recommend. You're giving it a slightly stronger recommend.
Yes, indeed.
Well, Brian, do you think we have time to cram in one more 2024 new release just really quickly? It's technically a prequel to a movie from 2015. It's related to a 1980s post-apocalyptic franchise, so it definitely fits the Gen X prequel bill.
Yeah, I think that works.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we're talking about Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. It's basically the origin story of Imperata Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron in Fury Road and by Anya Taylor-Joy in Furiosa, Mad Max Saga. Tells how she was kidnapped from the Green Place by Dementis, a new character played by Chris Hemsworth, then wound up driving big rigs for a Morton Joe, getting revenge for the death of her mother, and losing her arm in the process. Brian, let me ask you the burning question that we asked of our own prequel podcast. Was this prequel to Mad Max Fury Road necessary or unnecessary, in your opinion?
Well, you got to ask yourself, is any prequel or sequel really ever necessary? Is it just another cash grab or something like that? I am encouraged by the idea that in order to make Mad Max Fury Road, that George Miller went and wrote an entire screenplay about Furiosa's backstory so that the people making Fury Road would understand where the motivation for the characters were. So it definitely gives you the same feeling that Fury Road does, and at least the worlds are consistent here. Since they rebooted this, it's definitely different than the 80s Mad Max versions. But this one, it's very consistent. So if you liked Fury Road, it definitely has the same look and feel. Well shot. It's a really good looking movie, I'd say, just like the other one. And there's a lot of CGI in here. I know that bothers you a bit. But to me, this doesn't bother me in here. It almost feels like it needs to have that, enhances it a little bit, I think. Unlike when we talk about in Roadhouse, where the CGI kind of like messes things up and kind of you could almost feel like what they're doing with the enhanced action scenes. Here, to me, I don't know why, like when the action speeds up just a little bit for some weird reason, I don't know why I like that. It kind of feels more like it's being done intentionally as opposed to just for the sake of doing it. But there's some great action sequence in there, still really good action sequences. I think, and that's where I think this thing really shines, as with Fury Road. I actually liked Chris Hemsworth in the film. I at first, when he first came on the screen, I'm like, that's Chris Hemsworth, because he had the nose and he has the makeup and all this stuff going on, and he puts on a whole different voice. And you know what? I actually thought he did a good job playing up that kind of Mad Max type villain. And the Praetorian Jack, who Anya Taylor-Joy teams up with, when those two are together, is probably what I liked the most about the movie. And they go to the different cities, and it's a lot of world building. I would say that it did feel a little bit too long. This movie is the longest, much longer than any of the other Mad Max entries. Too much exposition and too much story. What I really liked about all the other Mad Max movies was they were usually short and sweet. Fury Road, it was like a lean movie that was like, let's just cut straight to the chase, and it was just action, action, action. Although it's really interesting stuff that he's building, the world building, it's almost like too much of a good thing. That's a minor complaint. I still thought I had a lot of fun watching it. Was it worth it? I thought it was definitely worth the trip to the movies. I think people should go see it. I definitely recommend it. What about you, Matt? Do you think the prequel was necessary or unnecessary?
Well, I thought it was somewhat unnecessary, but also at the same time not unwelcome. Because I think it does a great job of expanding the Fury Road world. We finally get to see the Green Place in full bloom. We get to see Gastown. We get to see the Bullet Farm. But the fact that we had to wait nearly a decade for what to me is essentially a Fury Road add-on or accessory made it like a little bit underwhelming, because I didn't think it really broke any new ground narratively speaking in the overall franchise. There were some cool new vehicles and attached like kind of contraptions to the big rigs. The the hang glider doohickey things were particularly pretty cool. But there was a noticeable increase of CGI, which did make it seem like I was watching a Transformers movie at times, especially when all the new doohickey contraptions would come out of the truck. Anya Taylor-Joy, I thought she was fine and believable as younger version of Charlize. It's the casting of the dudes, the dudes I had issue with. Instead of Mad Max, I mean, there's no, other than a quick glimpse of him like surveilling the wasteland, we see no Mad Max in this movie. Spoiler. But we do, unfortunately, get who I like to call Sad Max. Or Sad Jack, I guess his name is real, Praetorian Jack, as you said.
Oh, you don't like him?
Played by an actor named Tom Burke. I soon realized, like, ooh, this is not a good Tom Hardy substitute. Hemsworth did absolutely zero for me, and I think he kind of hurt the movie. I felt like he was bringing in a little bit of his Marvel snark baggage into George Miller land, where it certainly does not belong. I would have rather they just cast a complete unknown in that role. I'm going to agree with you. I did think it lacked the ferocious pace of Fury Road and the original Road Warrior. I mean, this thing was 2.5 hours and broken up into 5 chapters or acts, which had never happened in any of the other movies before. It was like a 5-act play. Like, what is this, Shakespeare? I mean, come on. There's a character named Scrotus in it, for Pete's sake. I don't think this is Shakespeare, and it doesn't need to be that long. So I kind of slagged on this a lot, but that doesn't mean that I disliked it. I'm kind of like somewhere in the middle. But first, Brian, why don't you tell me what your Furiosa bow tie rating was?
My Furiosa bow tie rating is 3 grease stain bow ties.
Well, I'm not too far off from you. I gave it 2.5 grease stained bow ties, and that grease is diesel grease, by the way, not popcorn grease. Do you want to give me your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 rundown rankings of the Mad Max franchise?
Sure. Bottom of the list, number 5 would have to be Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Number 4 would be Furiosa. Number 3 would be Mad Max. Number 2 would be Road Warrior, and number 1 would be Fury Road.
Okay. What about mine? Number 5, the OG original Mad Max, I've just never liked. Number 4 is going to be Furiosa. Number 3, I do like stuff beyond the Thunderdome and Beyond Thunderdome. Number 2, Fury Road. Number 1, kind of by far, I've watched this thing a zillion times, it never gets old for me, The Road Warrior. All right, that was all for the 2024 portion of the show, so I guess it's time to call it a night and wrap up episode 31 of the prequel series of the Gen X Multiplex.
Hey, Matt, there's something. Hang on. Do you hear that?
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting a call.
It's a Skype call. Hang on just a second. Let me look. Oh, jeez. It's David Lynch, apparently. Hello?
Oh, hello, Brian. How are you? I'm calling in your show to give a Dune 2 review.
Really? David? Matt, does that sound like?
I don't know. That doesn't sound like the old David Lynch you used to call in. It's the voice is a little off.
Well, it never really sounded like David to begin with, so
I thought it sounded kind of like him before. I mean, definitely sounds a little different, maybe not quite as...
No, this is nothing of how you heard it before. Is that Matt B? Very nice to meet you.
I guess nice to meet you, David, in air quotes, if that is indeed who you are. Brian, I thought he had zero interest in Dune.
I don't trust him, with all of his shenanigans he's pulled in the past. I don't necessarily trust this. And how did he even know we were doing the prequel again? I mean, that's a little suspicious.
No, Dune 2, it was actually very good. It was about a love triangle between Timothée Chalamet.
Oh, I'm yeah.
Yeah, I don't buy that. I don't think so, David. I don't think you didn't like Dune 1. There's no way you watched Dune 2. I'm not buying most of this. This doesn't make any sense to me.
If I can't give my Dune 2 review, which is very good, how about Rebel Moon, the Scar Giver?
I don't know. Now I'm really suspicious. Brian, what's Courtney? Is Courtney in the house? Is she somewhere like upstairs?
Oh, she's here, but I don't...
Could she make a Skype call to you, like from inside the house maybe? I don't know. It sounds like it's Courtney P, and it sounds like she's trying to Snyder Cut or Scare Give or Scar Give or whatever her way onto the podcast. David Lynch has zero interest, I thought, in Dune, but he definitely has zero interest in Zack Snyder. This to me sounds very suspicious, and I think we need to kind of cut it off.
Oh, no, this is David Lynch.
Anyway, David Lynch or not, this is a 1989 podcast. Lynch had 0 movies in 1989, and he has nothing, as far as I know, on the horizon for 2024. So he does not belong on this prequel series, period, end of sentence.
Oh, strong words from someone who doesn't have a job. At least I'm retired. The truth hurts, doesn't it, Matt B?
Well, that's definitely all for the May edition of Gen X Multiplex, the prequel, 1989. See you next month at the ass end of June when the RC Multiplex 10 officially opened with 4 new old movies and 0 David Lynch. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.